This video highlights information regarding United States versus Lopez, which is the second mandatory Supreme Court case in the federalism unit. So the background information of this case is this is a 1995 Supreme Court decision involving Alfonso Lopez, who's a 12th grader in a San Antonio, Texas high school. He's caught bringing a gun to school. So Lopez is actually charged federally for violating the 1990 Gun-Free School Zone Act. So he's actually charged in federal court, right, like national government, not state, for violating this law that Congress passed 5 years earlier. This law made it illegal to possess a gun within 1,000 feet of any school within the United States of America. Lopez is actually found guilty in his trial, and he's sentenced to 6 months in jail. Lopez's attorney makes the argument, not that he didn't have a gun, because he did have a gun in school, is that the law under which he was prosecuted for violating the Gun-Free School Zone Act was actually not something that Congress had the power to make in the first place, and therefore his client shouldn't have been convicted. This was like an unconstitutional use of like federal power. So the issue is, again, can the United States government do something like pass the Gun-Free School Zone Act if there's nothing in the Constitution, especially in Article 1, Section 8, that specifically matches up with gun-free school zones, right? So again, much like McCulloch when we reviewed that, the constitutional clause or connection being argued over is the necessary and proper clause and the commerce clause. The argument from the national government is like, okay, yeah, gun-free school zones are not specifically mentioned in the Constitution within Article 1, Section 8 as a power of the federal government. But using the necessary and proper clause, there is a connection between gun-free school zones and commerce, which is a state of power. And the connection is that obviously education is important to the economy, right? Education is important to commerce. If you are living in an area that is plagued by gun violence and violence in general, that'll negatively impact the education system, which will then negatively impact the economy. Therefore, the United States government is justified in creating gun-free school zones because there is a link to commerce, which is in the Constitution. The states argue, or the Lopez's attorney in this case argues that this is too much of a stretch. The holding is different from what happened in McCulloch. This is a 5-4 ruling that basically established the fact that the gun-free school zones were unconstitutional, meaning it was too much of a stretch between the creation of the gun-free school zones and commerce. So the gun-free school zone, in its form here, was declared unconstitutional. This is important because 99 times out of 100, what happened in McCulloch v. Maryland is probably what's going to happen in the case, right? Where the Supreme Court or another court is going to essentially allow the national government to do more than what's listed in the Constitution because they're linking it up to something that is stated there. This is the one example, right? The 1% of the time in which the Supreme Court pushes back and says that this is too much of a stretch. That, hey, we normally let you get away with this, but even for us, this is too much of a stretch. And this is a victory for the states in that it shows that the Supreme Court is willing to push back on the national government and is willing to kind of draw a line and prevent the national government from perhaps too flimsily trying to connect what they want to do to something that's in the Constitution. So McCulloch is a decision that allows the national government to do more than what's listed in the Constitution, kind of sets the precedent for the future, and that's how it normally works. But this is one of those rare examples where the Supreme Court says that the stretch is actually too much in this particular situation.